The footage runs 4 minutes and 38 seconds before the lights cut out. What you see in those 4 minutes is the reason a marine biologist named Dr. Lisbeth Voss spent the next 11 months refusing interviews, refusing to publish, and eventually refusing to look at the file at all. The submersible was at 6,420 meters in the Sunda Trench, southwest of Java. The pilot was running a standard biodiversity transect for an Indonesian-Dutch research consortium. Nobody on the surface vessel was expecting anything that day. Trench dives are mostly sediment and silence. Then the external lamp swept left, and something moved through the beam that the onboard computer could not classify, the pilot could not identify, and 3 separate teams of marine biologists, after months of reviewing the tape frame by frame, still cannot agree on. The footage has never been released publicly. A heavily compressed 17-second clip leaked to a Dutch news site in early 2025 and was pulled within 9 hours. What the consortium has confirmed, quietly, in conference hallways and one stilted press statement, is that whatever the camera caught down there does not match any cataloged species, any known carcass, or any reasonable extrapolation from the fossil record. And the part that has actually rattled the people who have seen the full file is not the animal itself. It is what the animal was doing. Stay with this. Subscribe if you want the rest of what we found, because the depth of this trench, the geology around it, and the specific reason scientists believe something has been hiding down there for a very long time is where this story stops being a curiosity and starts being a problem. If this kept you hooked, subscribe and drop a comment. What do you think Buzz really saw? The trench nobody really mapped. Here is the thing about the Sunda Trench that most people, even people who pay attention to ocean science, do not realize. It is not famous. The Mariana Trench gets the documentaries, the celebrity descents, the museum exhibits. The Sunda Trench, running roughly 3,200 kilometers along the southern edge of the Indonesian archipelago, has been studied less than the surface of Mars. That is not an exaggeration. NASA has higher resolution topographic maps of the Martian crust than the Indonesian government has of the trench off its own coastline. The deepest measured point in the Sunda is around 7,290 meters, in a section called the Java Trench proper. For comparison, that is deeper than Mount Fuji is tall, stacked on top of itself. Cold, near freezing, no light, pressure roughly 720 times what you are feeling right now sitting wherever you are. The kind of pressure that crushes unprotected submersibles into geometric shapes. Most of the trench has never had a human eye inside it. Almost none of it has had a camera. The 2022 Five Deeps follow-up expeditions sent crewed submersibles into the deeper Java section and came back with a few minutes of grainy footage and a list of species that had never been cataloged. Translucent shrimp, eels with no working eyes, a snailfish at 6,000 meters that should not biologically exist at that depth. Each one of those discoveries was treated as a minor sensation in the small world of deep-sea biology, then quietly absorbed into the literature. Nobody outside the field paid attention. And get this, the 2024 Voss expedition was supposed to be a routine follow-up. The consortium had funding for 12 dives over 6 weeks. The plan was sediment sampling, biodiversity transects, and a couple of geological cores from a fault line the team wanted to revisit. Nothing on the dive plan suggested anything unusual. The Indonesian Ministry of Marine Affairs had signed off. The Dutch funding body had signed off. The submersible was a workhorse, the same class that had been doing trench work in the Pacific for nearly a decade. Dive 7 was the one that broke everything. What the camera saw. The pilot on Dive 7 was a Belgian named Pieter Marchand, 41 years old, 11 years of trench experience, the kind of man who is hired specifically because nothing rattles him. Marchand has not given an interview since the dive. He has continued working, but only on shallow water projects. People who know him say he will not get into a submersible below 4,000 meters anymore. The transcript of the dive comms, which leaked alongside the 17-second clip, is mostly tedious. Equipment checks, depth confirmations, the surface vessel reading out pressure and temperature. Marchand was running the external lamp in a slow sweep pattern across a section of trench wall where the bathymetric maps had suggested an overhang. The plan was to photograph the wall, collect a few sediment samples from the base, and ascend. At 38 minutes into the dive, Marchand says, in flat Dutch, "It's bewoog daar." Something moved there. The surface asks him to confirm. He does not respond for 14 seconds. Then he says, in English, "I need you to look at this when we come up." The external lamp catches it twice. The first time, briefly, at the edge of the beam, what looks like a long pale curve disappearing into the dark. The second time, 11 seconds later, more of it. The animal, if it is an animal, is moving slowly across the camera's field of view at a range of maybe 12 meters. The lamp is not strong enough to illuminate it fully. What is visible is a body that the dive log describes as elongated, segmented, with bilateral appendages of indeterminate count, surface texture consistent with bioluminescent tissue, but not actively luminescing. That last detail is the one that has the marine biologists arguing. Bioluminescent tissue that is not glowing. Most deep-sea animals that can produce light. They use it constantly, for hunting, for mating, for confusing predators. An animal with the tissue structure of a bioluminescent organism, but with the lights deliberately off is, in the dry language of the field, behaviorally anomalous. The animal moves out of frame. The lamp follows. For roughly 40 seconds, the camera sees nothing but the trench wall and a faint snow of marine particulate. Then the lamp catches the animal again, much closer this time. And this is the part of the footage that the consortium has confirmed exists but has not released. According to two researchers who have viewed the full file and spoke to a Dutch science journalist on background, the animal turns toward the submersible. It does not flee. It does not attack. It positions itself perpendicular to the camera at a distance of approximately 4 meters, and it stays there, motionless, for 1 minute and 52 seconds. Then the external lamp fails. Marchand, in the transcript, is breathing hard. The surface asks him to confirm status. He confirms status. The backup lamp comes on 28 seconds later, considerably weaker than the primary. The animal is gone. The submersible ascends on schedule, no further events, no equipment malfunctions reported beyond the lamp. The lamp, when it was examined at the surface, had not failed in any way the technicians could identify. The bulb was intact. The circuitry was intact. The power supply tested normal. It had simply stopped producing light for 28 seconds, then resumed. Why this is not just another deep-sea fish? Here is where you have to understand something about deep-sea biology, because the instinct most people have when they hear about a strange animal at the bottom of the ocean is to assume it is just another weird fish. The ocean is full of weird fish. The deep ocean is full of fish, so weird they barely look like fish at all. Anglerfish, barrel eyes, gulper eels, the snailfish that the 5 Deeps expedition found at 8,000 meters. Strange is the baseline down there. What scientists actually mean when they call something behaviorally anomalous is much more specific. Deep-sea animals do not approach submersibles. They flee, or they ignore them, or in rare cases they investigate briefly before retreating. The submersible is loud, hot relative to the water around it, and producing light at intensities the local fauna has never evolved to handle. The standard response is to leave. A trench animal that holds position 4 meters from a submersible for nearly 2 minutes is doing something that has no documented precedent in the literature. Dr. Voss, in the one statement she has made publicly, said only this: "The behavior we recorded is inconsistent with predator avoidance, mate seeking, or feeding. We do not currently have a framework for what it is consistent with." That is scientist language for "we have no idea what this thing was doing." And get this. The leaked 17-second clip, which shows the second approach, but not the full minute and 52 seconds, has been analyzed by independent marine biologists who have no connection to the consortium. Dr. Andrew Stewart at the Museum of New Zealand reviewed the clip for a Wellington newspaper and was careful in what he said. The animal in the footage, he noted, does not match the body plan of any chordate fish he was aware of. The segmentation pattern suggested an invertebrate, but the scale, estimated at 3 to 4 meters in length, was far larger than any known invertebrate from that depth. Giant squid get larger, but giant squid have a body plan that anyone with a passing familiarity with cephalopods can recognize on sight. This was not a giant squid. A team at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego ran the clip through a comparative morphology database. The closest match the system returned was a partial match to fossilized remains of a Cambrian-era organism that has been extinct for roughly 500 million years. Now, that is not the same as saying the animal in the footage is a Cambrian survivor. The comparative morphology database returns closest matches the way a search engine returns search results. A closest match can still be very far away. What the Scripps team said publicly was that the closest match was unusual, and that the result probably reflected the limitations of the database rather than the actual identity of the animal. What they said privately, according to a researcher who attended the team's internal review, was less measured. The fault that should not be quiet. To understand why a Cambrian-era body plan being suggested at the bottom of the Sunda Trench is more than a curiosity, you have to understand a little geology. The Sunda Trench is the surface expression of a subduction zone, the place where the Indo-Australian plate is being driven beneath the Sunda plate at a rate of about 7 centimeters per year. It is one of the most seismically active regions on the planet. The 2004 earthquake that produced the Boxing Day tsunami originated here. The 2018 Palu tsunami originated nearby. Subduction zones are not stable ecosystems. The seafloor along the Sunda is being constantly reshaped, with sections of trench wall collapsing during earthquakes, hydrothermal vents opening and closing on timescales of decades, and large volumes of sediment being pulled down into the mantle. The conventional wisdom in deep-sea biology is that nothing in a subduction zone trench can persist as a stable population for very long. The geology rewrites the habitat too quickly. But here is what nobody expected. In 2019, a Japanese geophysical team mapping the Java section of the trench identified a region they called the Quiet Zone, a roughly 40-kilometer stretch of trench wall that showed almost no seismic activity over the previous century of records, surrounded by sections that had been violently active. The Quiet Zone was not predicted by any model of subduction zone behavior. The Japanese team's working hypothesis was that some structural feature of the underlying plate boundary was decoupling that section from the wider tectonic system, but they could not say what or why. The 2024 VOS Dive 7 was in the Quiet Zone. If you are a marine biologist looking for a place in a subduction trench where a stable population of anything could persist for geologically significant periods of time, the Quiet Zone is exactly where you would look. A pocket of the trench where the habitat has not been violently reshaped, where currents are stable, where deep time persistence is at least theoretically possible. The consortium did not target the Quiet Zone specifically. They targeted that section of trench wall for sediment sampling because the overhang structure was geologically interesting. The animal in the footage was not on the research agenda. It was a side effect of being in that part of the trench at all. Subscribe and hit the bell. Our next one goes even deeper. What happened after the surface? The surface vessel, the Amalia Teresa, returned to port in Jakarta on April 19, 2024. The footage from Dive 7 was reviewed on board during the return transit and was already, by the time the ship docked, the subject of internal disagreement between VOS and the expedition's deputy lead, a marine geologist named Andries Klein. Klein argued the footage should be released to the wider scientific community immediately. VOS argued it should be held back until additional dives could be conducted to confirm or rule out the observation. Klein lost the argument. The footage was classified internally as preliminary and was not distributed beyond the consortium's senior staff. In May 2024, VOS requested funding from the Dutch government for a follow-up expedition specifically targeting the Quiet Zone. The request was denied. The stated reason was budget constraints. The actual reason, according to a Dutch parliamentary aide who was briefed on the decision, was that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had received a quiet request from the Indonesian government asking that further dives in that specific section of the trench be deferred. The Indonesian government has not publicly acknowledged any such request. The Dutch government has not publicly acknowledged receiving one. What is in the public record is that no follow-up expedition was funded, that the consortium's permits for the Java section of the trench were not renewed for the 2025 dive season, and that VOS took a sabbatical from her university position in August 2024. In September 2024, a researcher at the University of Hamburg named Marius Berg, who had been peripherally involved in the consortium's data analysis, published a short paper in a deep-sea biology journal describing what he called anomalous low-frequency acoustic signatures recorded by the Amalia Teresa's hull-mounted hydrophone during Dive 7. The paper did not mention the visual footage. It described only the audio. According to Berg, the hydrophone captured a series of pulsed low-frequency signals during the period that, cross-referenced with the dive log, corresponded to the animal's stationary phase in front of the submersible. The signals were not consistent with any cataloged marine mammal vocalization, any known geological process, or any equipment artifact Berg could identify. The paper was withdrawn from the journal 9 days after publication. Berg has declined to comment on the withdrawal. The journal has declined to comment on the withdrawal. What 3 separate teams think it might be? Among the marine biologists who have seen the full footage, there are 3 working hypotheses, none of which is fully satisfactory. The first is that the animal is an unknown species of large invertebrate, possibly a previously undescribed cephalopod or polychaete worm, with an unusual body plan that does not match any cataloged group, but is not, strictly speaking, biologically impossible. The animal's behavior would, under this hypothesis, be explained by some form of curiosity or threat assessment behavior that has not been previously documented, but is not inconsistent with what invertebrates can theoretically do. This is the hypothesis the consortium has, in its very limited public statements, gestured toward. The second hypothesis, which is more popular among the researchers who have viewed the footage but is not stated publicly by anyone with their name attached, is that the animal represents a relict population, a surviving member of a lineage that diverged from the rest of life on Earth so long ago that its body plan does not fit cleanly into any modern taxonomic group. There is precedent for this. The coelacanth was thought to be extinct for 66 million years before a living specimen was caught off South Africa in 1938. The deep ocean has produced multiple lineages that survived in isolation while their surface-dwelling relatives went extinct. The quiet zone of the Sunda Trench, if the Japanese geophysical work is correct, is exactly the kind of habitat where such a relict could persist. The third hypothesis is the one nobody wants to write down. It is the one that gets discussed in hotel bars at conferences and never makes it into a paper. It is that the body plan visible in the footage is not just unknown but unclassifiable, that the animal does not fit into the existing tree of life because it did not come from any branch of it that current taxonomy recognizes. There are biologists who have argued for years that the deep ocean might harbor lineages that diverge from the rest of complex life so early that they constitute, in effect, a parallel evolution. Not aliens, not anything from outside Earth, just something that has been here, in a small enough population, in a stable enough refuge, for long enough that it does not share recent ancestry with anything else in the marine record. That hypothesis is not respectable. The biologists who hold it know it is not respectable. They hold it anyway, in private, because some of them have seen the footage and they cannot make the more conservative hypotheses fit. Why the Indonesian government is being quiet. In November 2024, the Indonesian Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries issued a new policy directive regarding research permits in the Sunda Trench. The directive did not mention any specific incident or finding. It established a new permit category for deep trench research, requiring all foreign expeditions to include Indonesian government observers to submit dive plans for individual approval rather than expedition-level approval, and to deliver all raw data to the ministry within 30 days of returning to port. The stated purpose of the directive was to strengthen Indonesian scientific sovereignty over its territorial waters. That is a legitimate goal, and Indonesia has been working toward greater control over research in its waters for years. The timing, however, has not gone unnoticed. What is harder to explain is the parallel directive issued by the Indonesian Navy in December 2024, which expanded patrol coverage in the southern Indian Ocean off Java to include sections of international waters that had not previously been a Navy priority. The Navy has not stated a specific operational reason. The patrols are routine, in the sense that they continue, but they were not routine in 2023. Whether any of this is connected to Dive 7, the consortium, or the leaked footage, neither government has confirmed. The denials have been careful. The directives have been careful. The whole situation has the texture of something being managed rather than addressed. What it would mean if it is real. There is a tendency, when stories like this surface, to want them resolved. Either the animal in the footage is something explicable and the mystery dissolves, or it is something extraordinary and the world has to reckon with it. Most of the time, in real science, neither happens. The footage exists. The animal, whatever it is exists or existed at some point in 2024 at 6,420 meters in a quiet section of the Sunda Trench. Nobody has been back. Nobody is going back anytime soon. If the relict hypothesis turns out to be right, the implications for evolutionary biology would be substantial. A surviving lineage from deep enough in the past would be the most significant biological discovery since the coelacanth, possibly since the first sequencing of an extinct species genome. It would force a revision of how scientists think about lineage extinction, refugia, and the carrying capacity of stable deep ocean habitats for ancient biology. If the unclassifiable hypothesis turns out to be right, and there is no good way to know without more dives, the implications are much harder to summarize. A branch of complex life that has been hidden in a single trench for hundreds of millions of years would be something the biological sciences have never had to seriously deal with. The closest analog is the discovery of archaea in the 1970s, when biologists realized that what they had been calling bacteria was actually two separate domains of life that had been mistakenly grouped together. Archaea did not require a new branch on the tree. It required redrawing the trunk. Whatever is in the Sunda Trench, if the more radical interpretation is correct, would require something similar. What you actually have to go on. Here is what is verifiable. The Voss expedition happened. Dive 7 happened. The Amalia Teresa returned to Jakarta on April 19, 2024. The hydrophone paper by Marius Berg was published and withdrawn. The Indonesian government issued the November and December 2024 directives. The Dutch funding body declined to support a follow-up expedition. Lisbeth Voss took a sabbatical. Pieter Marchand stopped doing deep trench work. Here is what is not verifiable. The full content of the footage from Dive 7, beyond the leaked 17-second clip, has not been independently confirmed. The internal disagreements between Voss and Klein are based on accounts from people who have not gone on record. The conversations between the Indonesian and Dutch governments are based on accounts from staffers who have declined to be named. The conference hallway hypotheses about parallel evolution and unclassifiable lineages are held privately, by serious people, and stated publicly by no one. What the consortium will say, when pressed, is that further analysis is ongoing. That phrase, further analysis is ongoing, has now been the official position for 14 months. There is no indication of when the analysis will conclude. There is no indication of whether the full footage will ever be released. There is no indication of whether anyone will be permitted back into the quiet zone to confirm what was recorded there. Pieter Marchand, in the only quote that has been attributed to him on the record, told a Dutch newspaper in late 2024 that he was no longer interested in talking about it. The reporter asked him whether he believed what he had seen. He thought about the question for a long time, according to the reporter's notes, and then said, "I believe the camera worked. I believe the lamp failed when it failed. What was there, I do not have a way to talk about." That is where the story sits as of this recording. A trench that nobody mapped properly. A quiet zone that should not be quiet. A submersible that captured 4 minutes and 38 seconds of footage that two governments would prefer nobody discuss. An animal that held its position 4 meters from the camera, did not glow when it could have, and disappeared the moment the light went out. The Sunda Trench is still down there. The quiet zone is still quiet. And whatever was in front of Pieter Marchand's submersible on April 12, 2024, is, presumably, still down there too. Subscribe if you want the rest of what we have been able to find on this, because there is a second expedition that nobody is talking about, run by a different consortium, in a different part of the trench, and the early reports from that one are stranger than anything that came out of Voss.